This is episode 3 of Taking the March from the Streets to the Classroom. And while it says part 4, because my intention was to show this forth, I think that before we get into solutions, you, the audience, needs to see the entire big picture. And so while I was talking about isolated cases last time, about one school, my child's school, Westport Heights Elementary School, and then in the second video, part 2, I talked about some South Bay districts. This time we're looking at all of the districts in LA County, right? And so I think when you see how much this is happening in your backyard, you may actually be more prone to take some action because it's happening in all of our backyards, right? And so if you're one of those NIMBY types, well, it's in your backyard, right? And so today we're talking about chronic absenteeism countywide, but we're also taking it to another level in making connections between chronic absenteeism and how students perform on the state mandated math assessments, how our high schoolers scored on their preparedness for college and careers, according to the chronic absenteeism data, find the relationship between chronic absenteeism and, the size of the reported subgroups on the California schools dashboard. Child, the one with no cover of the face, that's Cassandra, and that's her in 3rd grade with her classmates. All righty. And so the reason I included this this picture of my kid with her classmates is because this is how close to home this hits. My kid goes to school, a school named Westport Heights Elementary. What it's saying is that in each one of these squares with 4 kids, one of these kids is chronically absent. That's what the data translates to. And so which kid is it? And if it was one of yours, how would you feel about it? What would you do about it? And what if it's, my kids, one of them I have her selected there just for example, for show's sake. But then there's 2 other kids that I selected just randomly. What if those are her best friends, right? And you got to wonder, how does that affect my kid, right? How does it affect the class because of the absence? Because then the teacher can't keep up with his pacing plan because he has to make up for the lost time that these students have. And this is a very good teacher that they had this year, this 3rd grade. So I could see the effort that he would put in. But I remember when Cassandra was missing a lot of days of school, it's hard keeping up. It's hard keeping track. And it's simple stuff. And you think it's no big deal, but it is. And so it's something that we have to do for our own kids, make sure that they show up to school every day, well fed, ready to go. But also, we got to watch out for their classmates. We got to watch out for the kids and their schoolmates. We got to watch out for the community. We got to come together to help these kids out. We already know that, the parents might be good people, but they have different life situations, and we have to listen and understand, and if we're going to do something about it. All righty. Okay. And so what we have here is the set of highest performing districts in Los Angeles County. So if you look at the first column, this is the percent of students within the entire district that are chronically absent. Okay. And so we're looking at 3%, 4%. All right. You have the names, everybody from San Marino Unified all the way down to El Segundo Unified. As you can see, most of these are unified school districts. The only one that is not a unified school district, which is only elementary, is El Monte City School District. And that's why you'll see in column 5, it actually doesn't have a value or a quantity in there. But you'll see that, actually, let me go back to the previous graph. And so just to explain here, now as we're looking at the row 92, right? I called that best case scenario. And what is that saying? It's saying here we have a district that has high scores across the board in columns 3 to 5. It's scoring 5 for everything. It's blue for all 3 measures, which means that high level of graduates leaving ready for life after high school, high number of students scoring, proficient or above on the math assessment, and 5 indicating that there's a low rate of chronic absenteeism within that district. And it's a best case scenario because it's, assuming that you have a high number of Black and Hispanic students, a high number of socioeconomically disadvantaged students, a high percentage of English learners, a high percentage of homeless, and yet it's able to maintain high levels of performance. That's what we call pie in the sky. It's ideal, but that's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario would be that you have those that same level of subgroup enrollment, right? 97, 97, 75. And these numbers are arbitrary. I just picked them as high numbers, in comparison to the other measures, the measures for more successful subgroups, and seeing that, yeah, the stereotype, being self-fulfilled with high blue in subgroup enrollment and then red in performance. And so that's the worst case scenario. That's an indicator that that district is failing to be able to do anything to bring the most vulnerable students, the historically failing subgroups, to a higher level of performance. And so in no case will you find either of these, because these are the extremes, and one is ideal, the other one is a nightmare. But we come pretty close. And so I wanted you to know who's doing how. Okay, and so here we have our highest performing districts in all of LA County. And you'll see that in the performance measures of severity of chronic absenteeism, math proficiency, and preparedness for life after high school, a whole lot of blue and then a lot of green, which is right before blue. Okay, so these districts have it going on. Their kids do well. But then let's look at, well, how many Hispanic and Black students do they have? San Marino Unified, for example, only 7% of its entire population is Black or Hispanic. Alrighty, 8% of it is socioeconomically disadvantaged, so there's a high likelihood that we're talking about the same two groups of students. They even have a low percentage of English learners, and notice that the percentage of English learners makes up a higher proportion of the entire population than the Black or Hispanic students, because they most likely have several Asian students that are recent immigrants. San Marino is a upper middle class community, and so you can see that those students are probably still doing well in the mathematics and preparedness for life after high school because they have the means, right? And they put in the work. Can't discredit them for that. You'll notice that most of these districts have almost no homeless students in them, with the exception of El Monte City, which manages to do well in the chronic absenteeism measure. However, in math proficiency, it's at standard, right? Or average is what I call it. But it's doing that despite having a high proportion of Black and Hispanic students, socioeconomic disadvantaged students, and high rates of English learners and homeless. So they're doing something well. They're doing something right. And they keep the kids coming to school. But clearly there are some challenges for them in having them do better in mathematics. And so kudos to them. And at the same time, El Monte City, you have some things to look at and ask. I'm sure you are. And so, like I say here, conclusion, the highest performing districts have the lowest rates of Black, Hispanic, socioeconomically disadvantaged, English learners, homeless, and homeless enrollment. And so nothing really to celebrate there, right? We're not close to the best case scenario, not by any stretch of the imagination. Even El Monte City has a ways to go. Okay, now we're looking at the next batch of districts. We're looking at the second highest performing districts, where you see a lot of green in the performance measures with a little bit of blue for math proficiency. And you'll see that it's not all a notion of red for the second highest performing districts, right? You see that you have one district, Wiseburn Unified, with 69% Hispanic or Black, but it's an elementary district, and so it doesn't have the challenges of secondary, right? And you see that then most of the other boxes for subgroup enrollment are going to be red or orange, which is still low. And so there's nothing uniquely special that they're doing for the students, other than they're surrounded by other kids who are more successful, that are friends with the socioeconomically disadvantaged and the Black and Hispanic students. And so if it was all blue, and then if we broke up this data by subgroup and saw, are they still all green and blue, or is it that as a total they're green because some are very blue and some are orange and red in the performance measure, and it balances out to green, which is what I suspect we would see. Alrighty, so bottom line is you still see a lot of red, and now you see a lot of orange and barely any blue. So nobody's living up to that ideal of best case scenario, right? And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for exceptions and opportunities. You can see that they still have a low rate of chronic absenteeism. So if your kids go to that school, good for them. Regardless of what race or ethnicity, it's still a high performing, there's still high performing districts. And so your kids are most likely going to do better there, even if they're in the minority and they're not doing as well as the other students. And Redondo Beach, actually, I looked at their data with more depth, and I think at all levels, they're doing well. I mean, you can see there are 5 across the board for math proficiency. And so that can't happen without the Black and Hispanic students doing well in math as well. Alrighty, and then we move on to our 3rd highest performing school districts, going from San Gabriel Unified down to William S. Hart Union High School District. And you can see now their chronic absenteeism has dropped to 3, or yellow, which means it's right? It's average. And you see a lot more green, and you're starting to see some incidences of yellow and orange for their math proficiency and high school preparedness. And what you see on the right side measures when you look at subgroup enrollment is that you start seeing a lot more yellow, a lot more orange, very little red, which means that the populations of the subgroups that are more vulnerable are growing. With you start seeing a lot more green as well, which means that's close to highest level of population rates, predominantly being Black and Hispanic, socioeconomically disadvantaged. And, but there's still some good signs in the fact that in math, you still have a lot of green, even at the schools that have a level 3 of chronic absenteeism. And they have, high populations of African American and Hispanics. For example, Lowell Joint School District, 69% Black and Hispanic. And you have, I was going to say Hacienda La Puente, but they're actually 3s across the board. So there's a pattern here, right? It seems, it's either our fault as Black and Hispanics and something in our culture and our behavior, or there's something in the culture of the districts. That's what they call institutional racism, when these patterns follow the population and nobody's breaking the mold, right? It's like we've all accepted. And that's my thing is, that's why I vote none of the above, because it's neither side is right nor wrong. It's just part of the institution. And that's what we have to break. And that's why if we attack chronic absenteeism, I see an opportunity for us to break this pattern, okay? But it's been around since 1900. So there's something in the pattern of our own thinking that's not allowing us to focus and ask the right questions. Alrighty, so moving right along. Okay, now we're looking at the 4th highest performing school district, which actually is second to last. We can treat it as 4th highest, but there's only 5 groups, so it's really second to last, lowest level performing school districts. And I want to direct you first to that blue line between 40 lines, rows 42 and 43, where you're looking at the apparent tipping point. And I call it the apparent tipping point because it's the last time you'll see green in the measures of performance, right? And for math proficiency and preparedness for life after high school at Bonita Unified, with a 7% rate of chronic absenteeism. And they have high numbers of Black and Hispanic students, high numbers of socioeconomically disadvantaged, but they're not blue, right? But as soon as things turn almost entirely blue in terms of percent of Black and Hispanics and socioeconomically disadvantaged, now you see 3s, down the column, and almost all 2s, which is second, to last levels of performance. So it seems like as soon as and you'll see that the percent of English learners, it's not like it's overwhelming, right? With the exception of Paramount and Lawndale that have 31% and 36% English learners. And so they may not be able to perform as well as English only, but that's actually not the case in many cases. But what you do see to be the continuing pattern is as the number of socioeconomically disadvantaged and Black and Hispanic students grows and becomes the majority, the lower the performance levels. Okay, and what I want you to do is look at what district does your kid go to, or even if they go to private school, what school district's boundaries do they live within? Because those students, even though your child may not be going with them to the same public school, they're neighbors, they're friends, they spend time together, and even if they don't, stuff is happening in those neighborhoods because of the chronic absenteeism, because there's a higher propensity for socioeconomic disadvantage, Black and Hispanic students with special needs, for those students to suffer from chronic absenteeism, and we already saw what the effects are. Okay, so this is a community problem, right? And you got to address it in your community. I just want to make you aware. And then last but not least, we have the lowest performing districts in the county, right? Well, Beverly Hills down through Pasadena Unified, they're still considered part of the second to lowest, but you wouldn't think these affluent communities would have any problem at all, right? And here's an interesting one. Let's look at Beverly Hills Unified. As I look there, their level of chronic absenteeism is level 3, yellow. It's average, not good. Beverly Hills Unified, interesting, right? Yet their math proficiency levels high. I mean, not 5s, but 4s is very good. Their preparedness for life after high school for their graduates, also 4, very good. Until we look at percent of Black or Hispanic and who is causing the 3s, right? And you see that the measures, right? 10% of the population is chronically absent. 11% is Black or Hispanic. And so right there, are you also wondering if these two groups are the same people? And I say, remember what I said about chronic absenteeism and feeling unwanted. One of the things which I actually did not include in here after all was the causes for chronic absenteeism. One of them is feeling unwanted. I'm stereotyping here, but I've driven through Beverly Hills lots of times. I have friends that live in Beverly Hills. I've hung out in Beverly Hills. I don't see 1 out of 10 people being Black or Hispanic. Sorry, but I don't. Which means that these kids probably are bussed in here, or their parents ask for a permit, or they do the housekeeping for somebody who lives in Beverly Hills, and they asked them if they could use their address as a residence so they could send their kids to a Beverly Hills school, thinking once again, because the neighborhood's nice, that the school is actually going to do something better for the kids than their local school. And I would say it's likely that they are, but the price that we pay as a community, we take our best and brightest out of our communities, and then we take them someplace where they're not wanted, right? Or where, the proof is in who's chronically absent. I'm pretty certain if we break this data up, it's not going to be the Persian kids, the Asian kids, or the white kids. It's going to be the Black and Hispanic kids that are the chronically absent. And you got to ask yourself, why? What favor are you doing to your kid, right? Because that's the one living with the microaggressions in high school, let me tell you. Or they have to give up part of their identity or sacrifice dignity. I know, because I've been there. I know what it's like. A part of you has to sell out. You can't speak up because you're all alone, or you bunch up in your own little group and what's the point? You're not mixing in with other cultures, learning to deal with them. That's a whole other discussion that we need to have at some point, but it's also an issue, the issue. And you see the drop off there. It goes from red, right, in percent Black and Hispanic or poor, socioeconomic disadvantage, to a whole ocean of blue and green, right, pretty much. And then a whole ocean of 2s and 3s, mostly 2s. And then when you get down to the very bottom, you see that this hits home because I was a teacher in Inglewood. My family, on my wife's side lives in Inglewood. Like I said, I taught in Inglewood. I still do work in Inglewood. And I don't even count LA County as a school district. I think they have some special types of schools or programs. But Inglewood, so that makes Inglewood Unified the lowest performing school district when it comes to chronic absenteeism. It's in the ones, right, in the reds. Only Gorman Joint Elementary District has a 1 in the absenteeism. And look at the rate, 22%. So 1 out of every 5 students is chronically absent in Inglewood Unified. That's criminal. Okay, criminal if we don't do something about it, because now we know, right? And you see the math proficiency and preparedness for life after high school, we leave them at 2s. And that's because we're very lenient, right? I would say we're 1s. And then when I conclude myself as a when I talk about Inglewood, because Inglewood to me is my second home. And they have the triple whammy. Very high numbers of Black and Hispanic, some of the highest numbers in socioeconomically disadvantaged, and one of the few districts that has green when it comes to English learners. And we even have some homeless students that we have to take care of in our district. And having worked there as a teacher, as a consultant, I can tell you there's some of that plays a part, but it's our inability to do something, knowing that every year coming into school as the adults that are responsible for these districts. I mean, that's why, the district is not even a normal district. The governance isn't. And that's why there's a trustee from LA County who acts as the superintendent, and they have a revolving door situation too. So any progress that the superintendent made that was here before the one that's in there now, she's only been there for, I think, less than a year. What is she going to know? What is she going? She has to rebuild all the relationships, start from scratch. Money's been lost. And so you see, this is very close to our worst case scenario, where you have almost everything right on the cusp of being red in terms of performance, and everything on the cusp of being all blue in subgroup enrollment. All right, so that's the disaster we're dealing. That's what things are looking like in your community. Which one of yours is this one? Which one of these districts is your district? Whether you send your kid there or you just live in the boundaries, your tax dollars pay for this, okay? And so for those of you who have short attention spans, you may have even left already. I just wanted to show some screenshots to show you where I got this data from. You can study that later on. Here are the reports as I open them up as spreadsheets. And you see that status level. This is the college and career indicator report. So this has 70 indicators, if I'm not mistaken. I just wanted to show you, I'm not drawing this out of a hat. I associated by a combination of county, district, school name to get the data, pull it all together, and then report it, put it on one report. And so here's what's coming up in part 3, which is we're looking at addressing chronic absenteeism. So now I've told you what's happening, how it looks like at an individual school level, in a subset of all of the districts, just the South Bay districts, and making comparisons. Now, today you got to see not just the comparisons in chronic absenteeism for all the districts in LA County, but also how it affects performances, in math achievement and in preparedness for life after high school. And you see that there's a relationship between not just chronic absenteeism and performance, but also what subgroups are likely to be the ones that are most chronically absent and hence most chronically underperforming. And so if this doesn't hit you like a punch in the stomach, I don't know what will. I'm sorry I don't scream and I don't yell, but I show you the facts. Next time we'll talk about, like I said, addressing chronic absenteeism. This is old news. People have solutions. People have worked and they've made successes out of them. Unfortunately, they don't plan for the long term, for scalability and sustainability, and that's what we need to talk about. And we also got to take all this energy trying to defund the police let's defund the police because they have no crime, and let's have no crime because our people are educated, because our people are off the streets during school and during colleges instead of being at home. And I know that sounds like a one-sided story, but we got to keep focused, people. We got to keep focused. And so, in fact, I wanted to share something with you. Here on the right-hand side, I got a few words to share with you. To solve the problem, you first have to care, which means, you know, if it was all lip service, you know, what people said right now that Black Lives Matter is on the move. If it was all lip service, I mean, if you don't take action, then you don't care. It's all lip service. But if you decide to learn about the problem, you must listen with the intent to understand rather than judge, rather than respond. Okay? And when you get the truth, you have to accept the fact that maybe you didn't make it happen. You can blame it on your ancestors, but you let it happen as it perpetuates. But we must take this problem head on, and you have to address it like your child's life depended on it, even if your children is not one of the chronically absent or one of these subgroups, because it does. There's, you know, their neighbors, their classmates, their friends, and whatever else you want to say are who's surrounding your children if they're not part of these subgroups. Take it for what it is. All right. And if you're one of the NIMBY type, and guess what? And NIMBY standing for not in my backyard. It's already in your backyard. As I looked at the news when the riots were going on, the riots weren't happening in South Central this time. They were happening in the Melrose district. They were happening in Beverly Hills, the Beverly Center. Okay, so it's in your backyard. And there's already the talk about people flying out of California or out of the cities into the suburbs. This happened everywhere, even in rural America. All righty? Don't just, you know, change your thoughts for 2 weeks and think that this is going to disappear. People aren't going to let it disappear this time. We all got to come together. All right? And the true solutions will come when we have face-to-face truth-telling and not treating the victim like a victim. Okay? Which means don't pander. Don't tell me that after all these years of not doing something about it, because you have a certain way of thinking, all of a sudden that way of thinking has disappeared. I think you feel the urgency. You see that it's important, and maybe some of you feel liberated to finally speak up, but some of you might be doing it just out of fear. Read Leadership and Self-Deception. You'll understand that people can see right through that. It's got to be sincere, and for it to be sincere, it's going to take a lot more time. It's going to take a lot more listening. It's got to take you also telling what's on your mind. All right? Everybody's got to speak what's on their mind and forgive each other for it, but understand these are the observations that I've made in the lifetime. Okay? Now, if you think you're the victim and you were a victim, and I'm talking to my people of color now, okay, we're victims. Now what? We got to move on, right? We still got to learn to become CEOs. We want people of color to be sitting, you know, as chairman of the board and part of the board of directors. Well, guess what? We got to learn to be that, right? There's not that many. I tell you, I was a math major at Berkeley. Not too many of my people taking those majors. I was the only brown guy sitting at the lunch table with the executives when I was in my last corporate job. Every once in a while, we had another warehouse manager. We had a warehouse manager or something that was, you know, almost like a higher up. But that's it. Alrighty, you gotta learn to get there, right? This is not just about the glass ceiling. This is about the ceiling we put on ourselves. Alrighty, and so I invite you to watch a YouTube video with Neil deGrasse Tyson, famous astrophysicist, celebrity astrophysicist, African American from the Bronx. An interview by Tom Bellew on YouTube. It's called "This is Exactly How You Should Not Raise Your Kids," and just watch minutes 15:40 through 22:30, and that's all I have to say to those who can't let it go. That yes, we're the victims. Now let it go. All righty, everybody. Thank you very much. I hope you get to the end. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you found it informative. We're making moves here in Inglewood, and We're going to make this happen one community at a time. Thank you very much.